Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's edition of the BMSC Research Seminar Series. To just introduce BMSC real quick, we're a... Good afternoon, everybody. Excuse me for a moment. Getting some feedback. BMSC Research Seminar Series. Okay, I knew how to fix that this time. Okay, so just to start that over, the Banfield Marine Sciences Center is located on the west coast of Vancouver Island within the traditional territories of the Huu-ay-aht First Nation and is a not-for-profit registered Canadian charity, as well as a shared campus of the University of Alberta, University of British Columbia, University of Calgary, University of Victoria, and Simon Fraser University. So this BMSC seminar series is a great opportunity to learn from experts in our community about the new discoveries in marine science, and it also supports our vision to create an open, collaborative, and approachable community of scientists at BMSC and within our network. So we're really excited to expand our network a little bit today and welcome Parks Canada to talk about southern resident killer whales and some of the exciting research that's happening surrounding them. If you like what we're doing and want to see more or get involved, please visit our website at bamfieldmsc.com. So for question period, at the end of this seminar, there will be an opportunity to have some of your questions answered by our representatives here. You can type in your questions into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen at any time throughout the talk, and they will get to them, or as many of them as they can at the end. You can also use the chat function, but if you are using the chat function, note that it's a good place to make notes or say thank yous or talk to other attendees or panelists, but your questions will be easier if they're all sorted into the Q&A section. So I'd like to ask our representatives to unmute their mic and start their video while I introduce them here. We have Parks Canada virtual programming today. So we're going to be hearing about southern resident killer whales and how we can play a role in species at risk recovery. So we are both students working on the southern resident killer whale outreach team this summer. And today's presentation covers the southern resident killer whale's family structures, food chain, and threats to the population, while also highlighting some of the research that is being done at Parks Canada and what you can do to help their population stay strong and healthy. So welcome, Selby and Anna.
Hello.
I'm just going to ask you a question while I have the, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and then I've got a question for you that will start this. Start the Q&A section here. So I think my video is, maybe I'll just highlight my video. Okay, just one moment. It's going to take one. Does this cat look like an orca to you? I just noticed this morning that she's got the same coloration. And we've been calling her Oreo, but I think maybe we might change her name after this talk.
Totally.
Okay, sorry for that.
Cancer shading there.
Okay, sorry for that. Yeah, tangent there. Yeah, please go ahead and welcome.
Thank you. I think you have to turn our videos on for us. Oh, okay. There we go. Got it. Thank you.
Oops.
Cool. All right.
Great.
So hello, bonjour. My name is Selby. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna. And we're here today from Parks Canada to talk to you all about the southern resident killer whales and how you play a role in species at risk recovery. So Anna and I are both really excited to get to spend the afternoon with you all. But before we begin, we'd both like to acknowledge that we are coming to you from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Ts'u'xiit First Nations. And since we're all joining together virtually today, let's take a moment to acknowledge whose traditional territory you are on today. So Anna and I both feel very lucky to get to teach and learn on this land with you all for the afternoon. So thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to Banfield Marine Science Center for hosting us. So before we begin, a little bit about Anna and I. So we are both students at UBC. We know that some of you on the call today might also be students. So we wanted to talk briefly about our experiences working as students in Parks Canada. So I'll start. My picture is on the left there. And like I said, my name is Selby, and I am a Bachelor of Media Studies student at UBC. And I have only one course left before I graduate. Over the last year and a half, I've been working part-time, full-time, back and forth with Parks Canada as I finished up my degree. So I started on a team called Learn to Camp, and I'm now on the team with Anna for the Southern Resident Killer Whale Outreach team. So we get to do a lot of messaging about Southern Resident Killer Whales, and it's kind of all I focus on all day long, and I love it. Yeah, and like Sylvie said, I'm also a UBC student, and I'm just finishing up my degree now. So I'm taking a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resource Conservation. And I've also been on the Learn to Camp team with Parks Canada for a couple seasons, and now I'm on the Southern Resident Killer Whale Outreach team as well. So super excited to get to talk to all of you about the Southern Resident Killer Whales and what Parks Canada is doing to protect them. On my spare time too, you can definitely find me talking about Southern Resident Killer Whales to anyone who will listen. I'm also a big climber and hiker and skier. So it's a little bit about us. Yeah, and we just wanted to highlight that we are students doing outreach work. So we will be talking about some of the science and monitoring work that's going on in Parks Canada. We just want to highlight that we aren't the ones actively in the field doing the research. So if you have any questions that are more specifically about that through the presentation, you can keep those in mind, and we have some emails at the end for where you can direct those questions if we can't answer them for you. So a bit about Parks Canada, if you aren't familiar with what Parks Canada does. We look after national park reserves, national historic sites, and national marine conservation areas all across Canada. However, for today, we're going to be focusing more so on the coastal British Columbia areas. So in the map here, you can see in this area, we have 2 national park reserves. To start, the one on the coast of Vancouver Island, you can see is close to Banfield, the green part on the map. That is Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. The other national park reserve we have is the yellow ones of the islands, and that is the Gulf Islands National Park Reserve. We also have 3 national historic sites, being Fort Red Hill and Fisgard Lighthouse, the Gulf of Georgia Cannery, and Fort Langley National Historic Sites. And you can see also the blue part on the map, the darker blue, shows the Southern Resident Killer Whale critical habitat. So as you can see, that critical habitat goes along both of our National Park Reserve waters and through our National Historic Sites too. So that is a big reason that Parks Canada is really engaged in outreach and protection of this species, because it does come through our park waters. So we feel very fortunate that that animal gets to spend time in our park waters, and also really responsible for helping its protection. So this presentation will be pretty interactive throughout, and you'll notice that we have a few questions for you. So this is our first question. You can feel free to type your answer into the chat. So it's, have you ever seen a killer whale or an orca before? And if you have a story that goes along with it, we'd also love to hear about those too, and maybe go back and read some of them later. While you're all typing into the chat, I'll just share a little bit about some of my experiences with killer whales. So personally, I've had 2 kind of long distance experiences with killer whales before. And one of them, I bet a lot of you have probably had as well, taking the ferry over to Vancouver Island or to the Gulf Islands. So I had the chance to see a pod passing by a ferry as I was on my way to Pender Island, which was really awesome. Everyone on the top deck kind of ran to one side to go check it out. My other experience was definitely a really lucky one. I was coming back from Squamish after a day of rock climbing, and I was on the Sea to Sky Highway and just looked to my right and saw a big pod passing by. So definitely one of those things where you have to be at the right place at the right time. It looks like we've had a few different folks seeing them, so that's awesome. and other folks haven't seen them, it's okay. It's definitely a rare experience to have, just like cross your fingers. So you'll notice that Selby and I kind of switch between the words killer whale and orca throughout this presentation. There's lots of different names for this animal. It definitely has changed over time. So you'll see that I've included 4 names here. The bottom name there is killer whale in the New Channel speaking people's language. And then there's 4 other words there as well. So it's kind of up to you which word you want to use. We will be switching between them throughout the presentation. Great, so our agenda for the day, we're going to start off by talking about who the southern resident killer whales are and some of the other ecotypes of killer whales that can be found in our waters. We're going to talk about some of the threats to their population. And throughout the presentation, we're also going to be sprinkling some of the research that's going on in Parks Canada. We'll talk about the 2020 management measures to protect the southern resident killer whales, and then we'll finish off with what you can do to help, and we'll have some time for questions as well. All right, so to begin, we're going to talk about the 3 different ecotypes of killer whales that can be found in our waters. So the first one that we'll talk about are called the offshores. So you can see in the map there, the offshores don't spend time close to the coast for the most part. They spend time out in the open ocean, and not much is known about them. The other ecotype we have are the big or the transient killer whales. You might have heard them being called either or. In the map there, you can see that their range is more kind of like the cream color. So they're all along the coast of North America, the west coast of North America. And they do spend a lot of time in the Salish Sea, especially in the summer months. So it is possible that you could see them when you're out because they do spend quite a bit of time around here. These killer whales are mammal-eating killer whales. So they eat things such as seals and sea lions. Whereas our resident population, the 3rd ecotype, they are salmon-eating or fish-eating killer whales. So they really love eating salmon, in particular Chinook salmon. And you can see in the map there, their range is the darker orange area. So really close to the coast from Washington and up north towards Alaska. These ones you can also find spending a lot of time in the Salish Sea in the summer months. And they are split up into 2 populations. So if you were to see a population in the Salish Sea in the summer months, you would be most likely seeing the southern residents. However, there's also a population called the northern residents, and they spend most of their time off the north of Vancouver Island and up, whereas southern residents are around Vancouver Island and south. Their range does overlap occasionally, but they aren't really seen together very often, and they don't really interact for the most part. The southern resident killer whales are split up into 3 different pods or social units, those being J pod, L pod, and K pod. So they're kind of like big extended families, and they travel together, they hunt together, and yeah, so they're the 3 different pods that you could see in our waters. And there's a lot of focus on the southern resident killer whales right now because they are an endangered species. There are only 72 of them left in our waters. So especially as we saw in the map at the beginning, the southern resident killer whale critical habitat goes through both of our national park reserves. So that's another reason that Parks Canada is putting a lot of focus on the southern residents in particular. So the southern resident killer whales have really strong family ties. On the screen here, I have a few of the matrilines of J-pod killer whales. So for example, if we look at J2, you see that it starts with Granny at the top and then all of her offspring is below. So the gray killer whales are the ones that have passed away, whereas the colored in ones are still currently alive. So what's really interesting, especially about J2, and at the top there, Granny, she's actually the oldest known killer whale. And if you want to take a moment, try and guess how old you think she might have been when she passed away. So she was thought to be about 105 years old, so really old. So yeah, it's really important that these southern resident killer whales have those older female leaders, because what they do is they show the younger calves where the best hunting grounds are, and they also help to raise the younger calves too. So they stopped giving birth around 30s, 40s, and at that point they switched to really focusing on helping to raise the calves and help the population grow. So it's really important that we're having these whales around that have that deep knowledge that they can share with the rest of the pods. So I'm going to share a kind of sad story of a whale named Luna, also known as Tsu'xiit or L98. And his story kind of illustrates how sometimes humans can love the killer whales a little bit too much, or not maybe too much, but in a way that isn't as productive for them. So the story of Luna goes that he was separated from his family at a young age and ended up traveling alone in the Nootka Sound for a few years. And the humans in that area really loved him a lot. He had lots of really close interactions, would come up to boats, and as you can see in the picture there, would just have really, really close interactions with humans while they were out on the waters. However, it was really unfortunate that in 2006, Luna was accidentally killed by tugboat propellers. So obviously that was really devastating for the whole community there. Luna was a really important part of the waters around there. And it was just a really unfortunate accident, but it does kind of illustrate that what we want is not always necessarily the best for these killer whales, especially since they're endangered. We want to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Even though these can be really awesome interactions to get to be that close to a really big marine mammal, at the end of the day, it isn't what is best for their population. So we're saying that we need a long distance relationship now. So some of the ways we're doing that is we have an approach distance of 400 meters at least when you're in the waters around coastal BC. So I've got a more specific map of that later in the presentation. We can see where that 400-meter approach distance more specifically is. And that's just some of the ways that we're having that long distance relationship, and we're showing them love in another way. All right, so as I said earlier, this will be a pretty interactive presentation. So we're going to head over to Kahoot. And if you don't know what Kahoot is, it's basically like an online quiz kind of app. So if you go to your web browser and just type in kahoot.it, and then if you type in the code that you see on the screen here, then you can join our quiz. And we'll just have a couple questions here at the beginning. And it's also kind of a bit of a competition. So you want to answer as fast as you can and try and get that first place spot. And we'll just wait a few minutes while people join. And you can use your phone or your laptop or any device you have as well. Right, looks like we've got 5 players in so far. We'll wait a little bit longer for everyone to head over to Kahoot. Okay, give you like 20 seconds to join in and then we'll start the game. right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Perfect. So you'll see the question come up on the shared screen and you can answer on your device. And you have 20 seconds to answer. All right, 3 seconds. Oh, nice. Looks like we've got 6 votes for 3 ecotypes, which is the right answer. We've got our Biggs killer whales, our offshore killer whales, and our residents. Nice job, everyone. Right, you've got 15 seconds for this question. Perfect. Everyone got that one right. Definitely, the southern resident killer whales are endangered with only 72 of them left. So we'll head back over to our PowerPoint screen, and you can just leave your Kahoot app open because we will come back to that at the end of the presentation. All right, so a lot of people hear that the southern resident killer whales are endangered and kind of wonder how they got to that state and what's preventing them from recovering. So as you can see on the screen here, researchers hypothesize that there are 3 large threats that the southern resident killer whales are exposed to that are threatening their survival and causing their population to decline. Also, because females don't reach sexual maturity until about 10 to 13 years old, and they also only give birth to 1 single calf at a time, and they only have a new calf about every 5 years or so. New additions to the population are pretty infrequent, and even then there's only about a 50% chance or lower that a pregnancy will actually be successful. So I'm sure that many of you have probably heard of Tsu'xiit, who became famous worldwide for carrying her dead calf around with her for 17 days. And this was a worldwide event that it demonstrates the unfortunate reality for the southern residents as they face these 3 key threats. So Selby and I are just going to go over each threat in detail here, and I'm going to start off with prey availability. So we have another question for you. If you want to type in the chat, if you know the answer, we want to know, what prey do southern resident killer whales depend upon? I'll just give you a few seconds to answer if you know it. Yeah, nice. We have the right answer already in the chat, which is Chinook salmon. You know your stuff. So that is correct. Southern resident killer whales eat a lot of Chinook salmon. They've been eating a diet of around 90% or even more Chinook salmon for generations. And from what we know, it's really, really hard for them to switch their diets to anything else. They do have some chum salmon in the fall months, but most of their diet is that Chinook salmon. So they eat a minimum of around 18 to 22 salmon a day, and that's just to meet their absolute minimum energy requirements. So now if we think about multiplying that minimum salmon amount per day by the 72 whales in the population, that gives us about 1,300 salmon every single day that they need to eat. And then if you start thinking about July and August, which are the months where the southern residents congregate into their critical habitat around BC and Washington off the coast here, that's 62 days in July and August. So if you multiply all those numbers together, that's about 80,000 salmon in 2 months that these whales need to just meet their basic energy requirements. So if you start to think about other animals that need to eat Chinook or like to eat Chinook, and other humans who like to eat Chinook, you can imagine the huge pressure that is put onto Chinook salmon stocks and the dire need really to maintain them. And researchers they do think that Chinook salmon stocks might be in decline as well. So something to keep an eye on for sure. And a question we get pretty much every day is, why are the southern residents so selective with what they eat? Why can't they change their diet to include other prey? Honestly, researchers aren't totally sure why they haven't expanded their diet to include other prey, but they do know that they use echolocation to locate their food. And by using echolocation, they're able to find out where the exact location and how large the size is of the salmon that they're hunting. And because Chinook salmon are the largest out of the 5 species of Pacific salmon we have here in BC, it's really easy for the southern residents to select for those really large salmon. And as you can see on the screen here, I have a little diagram, and I think this is pretty cool. I actually just learned this fact myself. And echolocation is a really, really unique ability that a lot of cetaceans have. So by cetacean, I mean whales, porpoises, dolphins. And this diagram does show an image of a dolphin, but it pretty much works the same way in most cetaceans. So as you can see at the top there, there's an oil-filled organ called the melon that sits on the front of the skull. And behind the melon are the nasal air sacs, which are near the blowhole on killer whales. And that nasal sac can generate sounds, so sounds like clicks and whistles and calls by forcing air through. And then these sounds, as you can see on the diagram in the blue, are pulsed ahead of the whale through that melon there. And then they can bounce off their prey item, like a Chinook salmon, and then they come back to the lower jaw, which is also oil-filled or fat-filled, and then that vibrates the inner ear bones, which sends a message to their brain. So it's a pretty complicated process for sure. But through echolocation, the whale can find out exactly how big their salmon is, where it is, what species it is, and how fast it is and which direction it's traveling in as well. So they're definitely able to select for Chinook salmon, even though researchers aren't exactly sure why. So even though researchers don't know why they really select for Chinook salmon with basically no exceptions, it's obvious that there does need to be abundant Chinook for the southern resident population to survive. So one really important piece of research that is happening right now in our Parks Canada places in Gulf Islands National Park Reserve and Pacific Rim National Park Reserve is forage fish monitoring. So you'll see here on the screen, the left 2 photos are images of Pacific sand lance, which are a type of forage fish, which is a super important food source for Chinook salmon. One of our researchers in the Gulf Islands National Park Reserve actually opened up the stomach of a Chinook salmon and found 400 of these little guys in one stomach, which is pretty crazy. So they need a lot of these to be healthy and strong as well. And on the right-hand side of the slide there, you can see one of our researchers collecting sand in their nesting habitat. So southern resident killer whales depend on the health of the food chain that you see here on the screen. So without abundant plankton and abundant forage fish, there definitely can't be a healthy Chinook salmon population. And of course, without a healthy Chinook salmon population, as we've learned, the southern resident killer whales will be in continuous decline. So researchers at Parks Canada are focusing on forage fish in particular, such as Pacific sand lance and surf smelt. And they're studying their spawning and burying and pelagic feeding habitats. So they want to find out if any of this habitat is disappearing, because these fish require super, super fine-grained sand habitat. And the Parks Canada staff and researchers are trying to find out if it's becoming less available and therefore turning out less forage fish for the Chinook salmon to eat. So now that we've covered the first threat quickly, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Selby, and she's going to tell you a little bit about physical and acoustic disturbance. Thank you. Yeah, so the second threat that we're talking about today is physical and acoustic disturbance. So the southern resident killer whales, especially in the summer months, travel around a lot of large cities such as Vancouver, Victoria, and Seattle. And in those big urban areas, there can be a lot of vessels and boats which cause loud underwater acoustic disturbances. And as Anna was talking, we know that the killer whales use echolocation to find their food. So if there's really loud waters, it makes it more difficult for them to find their food and use their echolocation. In addition, they're also really social beings, especially in particular the southern resident killer whales. Out of all the killer whales, they communicate with one another a lot. They're communicating all the time, and that's a really important way of how they're able to form those really strong family bonds and just general bonds with their pod. So for that reason, it's really important that they're having waters that are quiet enough that they can do their echolocation, they can communicate with one another without too much disturbance. So I have two audio clips here that I'm going to share. The first one is an audio clip of the southern resident killer whales just communicating back and forth with one another. And the second one is the sound of a boat passing by. And both of these were taken with a hydrophone in waters just off of the coast of BC. So we'll start with the southern resident killer whales communicating. And then we'll move on to the boat sounds. All right, so it might have been a little bit hard to hear. I have to say we had a little bit of technical difficulties with that this morning, but hopefully you kind of got an idea that when the boat sounds came along, there were some really heavy chugging sounds. And when the southern residents were communicating, they were talking back and forth a lot, making a lot of sounds. So those heavy chug sounds of the boat can really affect that communication. So some of the really awesome work that's being done at our Parks Canada locations include vessel-based monitoring. So our scientists are going out on the water, they're bringing big binoculars, big cameras with zoom lenses, and they're spending time monitoring the different whales, and they're actually able to identify which whales they're seeing when they're out on the waters. So what they're doing is they're taking photos of the dorsal fin and saddle patch area. So you can see an example of a photo that would be really useful in identification on your right. So that is just a photo of some of the members in L pods. And the way that our scientists identify the different individual killer whales are by their saddle patch. So if you'll notice that kind of whitish gray behind their dorsal fin, that is unique to each individual, and that's how they're able to identify. Along with that, if they have any kind of scratches on their body, any notches in their dorsal fin, that will also help to identify. So it's really cool because we're able to be out on the water and figuring out which specific whales are out there in a really non-invasive way by just having a big zoom camera and binoculars. And what our scientists are discovering is that there is year-round distribution of the southern residents in our park's waters. So just yet another reason that it's really important to be putting in a lot of work, and especially with these management measures that we'll be talking about in a moment, that these killer whales are staying in the waters, and we're really monitoring what their habits and what their behaviors are out in these waters. So this research is outside of Parks Canada, but I just thought it was really cool. So we decided to include it in this presentation as well, because it's really good news and it's just a really interesting way of doing some research. So what people are doing is they're sending up drones and flying them over top some of the killer whales and taking drone photos. And after doing that, they're able to identify the health of the killer whales, whether they're in good health, whether they're not maybe malnourished. So a really interesting way of finding out the health of them. But along with that, they can also find out if there are any pregnant killer whales. So in the picture that is on the screen here, you'll see photos of Racer or L72. The one on the left is her in September 2019. The one on the right is her in July 2020, so it was just taken last month. And you'll see that around her belly area is much wider than it was in September 2019, which means that she is pregnant. So this is really exciting, great news. Scientists also think that there are a few other southern residents that are also pregnant. And as we talked about, there are only 72 of them and the population is endangered. So this news of pregnancy is really exciting, and everyone's really hopeful that they are successful births. So the last key threat that we'll be talking about are contaminants, and I'm going to throw it back to Anna to cover that one.
So while Parks Canada isn't directly involved right now with research on contaminants in the Salish Sea and surrounding areas, there is a lot of research being done by our partners as well as other agencies within the Government of Canada. So we define contaminants as things like oil spills, microplastic ingestion by the killer whales, bioaccumulation of toxins from the prey that they eat, and as well as chemicals such as flame retardants. And the Government of Canada is doing lots of research and monitoring into contaminants in the water. And they're also strengthening regulations on 5 harmful substances, including 2 flame retardants, just to stop the chance of any of them entering into our ocean environments. So these are basically the 3 threats, and we are just going to move on to some of the 2020 management measures that Parks Canada and the Government of Canada, in collaboration with Environment and Climate Change Canada and Transport Canada and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, are doing to protect the southern resident killer whales. So I'll pass it over to Selby.
Sorry, I was muted. So here you can see an overview of the 2020 management measures to protect the southern resident killer whales. So I'll be going more in depth on what each one of them are. And a lot of these have to do with if you're out in the water and boating. So even if you aren't a boater, I know myself, I am not, but I still find it really interesting seeing what Parks Canada and the other government organizations are working on and what they're doing to protect the southern resident killer whales. So we'll go to the next slide. So the first one that's included in the management measure is something called an interim sanctuary zone. And they've been created as spaces of refuge for the whales to rest, socialize, and eat. So basically they've been identified as really key areas for the southern resident killer whales. And in these areas, there is no boating and no fishing. So intended as areas, for them to just be able to rest and forage for food without being disturbed by any boating or fishing. So you can see in the photos, those interim sanctuary zones are the red parts of the map. So there are 3. There's 2 in the Gulf Islands, one off of North Pender Island, the other off Saturna Island, and one through the Juan de Fuca Strait at Swiftsure Bank as well. And these are in effect from June 1st to November 30th. The next part of the management measures are some fishery closures. So as we know, southern residents are struggling to find enough food to eat. So these fishery closures are meant to help them out a little bit more. So in these yellow areas on the map, you can see through the Gulf Islands National Park Reserve, there is no recreational and commercial salmon fishing. That is happening August 1st through October 31st, 2020. And you'll see here, again, the yellow part, this is the same thing, fishery closures along the Juan de Fuca Strait. And finally, there's also a 400-meter approach distance. So I mentioned this a bit earlier in the presentation. Now you can see exactly where on the map I was talking about. So the orange section is where that 400-meter approach distance is in effect. So it's between Campbell River and just north of Ucluelet. And we were talking about, again, how noise can make it more challenging for the killer whales to find food and socialize. So by having this 400-meter approach distance, we're allowing the whales to have enough space to kind of do their own thing while they're out on the water without being disturbed by boats getting too close. And also how we were talking about Luna, how Luna was getting really close to boats, and then he ended up passing away because he got too close to a boat and the propeller killed him. Of course, we don't want that happening again to one of our southern resident killer whales, since there are so few of them. There are also some voluntary actions that folks can take if they're spending time out on the water, such as if a killer whale appears near you, to turn your engine to neutral and let the whale pass. Also, stop fishing if you're within 1,000 meters of a killer whale, as well as reducing your speed. You can also turn off your echo sounders and fish finders when they're not in use. And we're also inviting people to take a look at the bewhalewise.org website for more information on how you can be respectful and help the whales while you're out on the water. So these are motorized boats, but also if you're out kayaking, stand-up paddleboarding, these are in effect for you as well.
So you might not be out on the water in a boat this summer, like Selby was just talking about with the 2020 management measures, but you can definitely still help from home or from the shore. And as you've learned, there's a ton of initiatives going on right now, not only within Parks Canada and the Government of Canada, but all along the West Coast with our partner organizations as well. So it can be super easy to feel helpless at times, but please don't forget that you're also a key player in the recovery of southern resident killer whale population as well. So the first one that I want to talk a little bit about is land-based whale watching and citizen science. So I'm sure a lot of you are pretty familiar with citizen science. So if you're out at the beach or on a boat and you see any kind of whale or any kind of cetacean, you can take a photo of it if you can and report it via the phone number that you see there on the screen. So it's 1-866-I-SAW-1 or 1-866-472-9663. Otherwise, you can report it online through the BC Cetacean Sighting Network or through their app, which is called Whale Report on the App Store. And these sightings are actually used in scientific research all the time and can also help alert boats in the area to slow down and take some extra precautions. And the BC Cetacean Sightings Network actually gets quite a few requests every year for this data. So you are really making a direct impact if you report your sightings. And if you're really keen to see a whale and participate in some of this citizen science, then you can check out the Whale Trail. So you go to the Whale Trail website, you can find out where the best land-based whale watching spots are. The second one is eating ocean-wise seafood or sustainable seafood. So sustainable seafood can be defined as a species that is caught or farmed in a way that makes sure that their long-term health and stability of that species is ensured. And if you want to learn a little bit more about how OceanWise defines sustainable seafood, then you can check out this link that I've included on the slide here. The third one I want to talk a little bit about is disposing of your waste properly. So this is a really tangible way to make sure that you're not having direct impacts on the southern resident killer whales. So basically this means that you're not putting anything down the drain that shouldn't go down the drain, so like chemicals or medications. Another one that a lot of people don't know about necessarily is that you should avoid washing your car on the street with soap because some of that soap can go directly into salmon-bearing streams. And I actually have firsthand experience witnessing this. I was in field school last semester and I saw a stream that had been impacted by lots of soap from soap that had been washed down the streets in the city of Vancouver. And unfortunately, there was no more fish left in that stream afterwards. And finally, you can also take some smaller actions, like simple ones like adding a microplastics filter on your washing machine, which just prevents microplastics from entering our ocean environments. And the last one, which is my favorite one, is to be an advocate and a storyteller for the orcas. So you can be their voice. They don't have a voice, right? So you can educate your family and friends and find out how you can all take action together. There's a ton of information out there on the internet as well. I'd encourage you to do some more research afterwards. The more awareness that we have and the more voices we have behind southern resident killer whale recovery, the stronger that our actions can be to help them recover. So we just have 4 more questions for you on the Kahoot. If you want to switch back to your Kahoot screen, if you have that on one of your devices. And we'll just give you a minute or so to switch back over there. All right, I'll give you a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Perfect, you're all listening. That's right. The southern resident killer whales eat pretty much all Chinook salmon with a little bit of chum in there. And looks like we've got Jess in the lead. Go Jess. Perfect, that's also right. So when you're boating in the orange zone or the critical habitat zone, boats should definitely stay at least 400 meters away from killer whales. So as Selby was talking about earlier, that can help reduce the acoustic and physical disturbance on the southern resident killer whales. We've got Jess in the lead and Grace in second. Good job, everyone. These last 2 questions, you can select multiple answers, just so you know. Awesome, everyone is doing so well. That is correct. So we have the 3 identified threats that are contaminants, prey availability, and physical and acoustic disturbance. Oh, and Chloe is coming up in second. Jess is still taking the lead though. Final question here, and this one is also a multi-select question. Awesome. It's great to see everyone interested in helping to protect the southern resident killer whales, and see some folks interested in land-based whale watching too, and maybe participating in some of that citizen science. See who wins. We have Ray in 3rd place, Chloe in 2nd place, and Jess in 1st place. Good job, everyone. Thanks for playing. Perfect.
Congrats, that was fun. You even got some confetti at the end to celebrate. So we started off today with the story of Luna and the complicated ways that loving these killer whales can sometimes end up. But we're going to end today on a lighter note with the story of Tofino, or J56. So in the photo there, Tofino is the smaller killer whale. So Tofino just turned 1 about a month and a half ago. So that is really exciting news because the probability of southern resident killer whales making it past their first year is quite low. So it's really great that she made it to her first birthday, and big celebrations to that. So Tofino was first seen off of the coast where near Tofino, which is where she got her name from. And with the last successful birth of J-pod, which is the pod that she was born into, the last successful birth was in 2015. So it had been quite a number of years, but luckily Tofino is strong and healthy now and is doing great. So Tofino is one example why these management measures and why all of us being advocates for the southern residents is needed and really important, because little baby Tofino is the beginning of the next generation of southern resident killer whales.
That pretty much brings us to the end of our presentation here. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating in all the interactive elements. If you want to find out a little bit more about Parks Canada's efforts to support southern resident killer whale recovery, you can check out those websites linked there on the screen. You can also check out more in detail about the 2020 management measures at the first link there. And finally, if you have really specific questions about those management measures, then you can email the Transport Canada email at the top there. And I think we have a few minutes for questions, so we'll do our best to answer those if you want to type them in the Q&A portion. We'll just give you a few minutes to think about any questions you might have. We're also happy to answer questions about Parks Canada in general as well, if you have any questions about that.
Yeah, while we wait for that to come in, any questions to come in too, I can share a fun fact that I recently learned about baby killer whales, because we were just talking about Tofino. So the baby killer whales, when they're born, are kind of pinky orangey. So maybe, Rachel, if you want to go back a slide, we can look at that picture of Tofino. You can see that around her eye, the patch that's normally really white is kind of pinkish, and even under her belly was also pinkish orangish when she was first born. And one of the reasons is because their blubber is quite thin when they're first born, so that's the blood vessels kind of showing through. But now that Tofino's 1, maybe at the age of 1.5, she'll start turning much more white because she has that blubber buildup. And I just thought that was the cutest thing, that there's little like pinkish orangish killer whales that are being born. And I think we saw a question come in.
Yeah, it looks like is Parks Canada's forage fish research in federal park areas only? That's a good question. Within Parks Canada, it's around our parks waters for sure. But I know that there are a lot of other organizations doing this research as well on some of these smaller fish that salmon and other fish feed on too. Do you have anything to add to that, Sylvie?
Oh, it sounds great.
Yeah.
And wait, go
Have
ahead.
you seen Pierce's question in the Q&A section over there?
Yeah, what is Parks Canada about? So that is a big question, but to kind of summarize, so like I was saying, Parks Canada looks after the national park reserves, national parks, national historic sites, and national marine conservation areas all across the country. So we're really focused on preserving these beautiful natural areas and sharing these cultural gems with everyone, but not only for people right now, but also for the future generations. So making sure that our children and our children's children are able to see and enjoy these beautiful natural and cultural areas. Do you want to add anything, Anna?
That was perfectly summarized.
And what is risk recovery about? Do you have any thoughts on that, Anna?
Are you able to elaborate at all on that, Pierce? I think we talked quite a bit about the 3 risks that the southern resident killer whales are facing, and then some of the things that Parks Canada is doing for their recovery. We didn't really talk about risk recovery, if you just want to elaborate on what you mean by that.
And while Pierce is typing that, I'll just take a moment to thank you both so much for this excellent presentation and for educating us further on these amazing populations and their struggles. So we really appreciate you taking the time, and yeah, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this has been really fun.
I might ask Pierce to use the resources you provided to email you directly if they're interested in finding out more about the risk recovery efforts. And on that note, I don't see any other questions coming in, but hi, Rachel Baker says, thank you so much. A lot of people have shared their stories through the chat as well, including times that they saw orcas. So that's pretty cool. I still like to call them killer dolphins. That's my story.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just, yeah, thank you again so much. And I think I'll end the meeting for everyone right now. And Pierce, please do reach out to the representatives from Parks Canada at the resources mentioned on this slide.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you again, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.